Well, thank you very much and for being here. And can you hear me? Maybe I should get closer. Is that better? All right. Just speak to it. I want to speak to you, not to the microphone, but nonetheless, I want you to be able to hear me. Well, I want to transition from the first panel and, of course, Dr. Newman's presentation to stick to the theme of transitions and countries transitioning from authoritarian political systems and controlled markets into the market economy and democracy, and then trace the role of civil society in this transition and whether they can shape the transition or, as Dr. Carother from the Carnegie says, that actually the very concept of transition is elusive, because old systems and entrenched interests and mechanisms of control seem to persist, only to have a new face and a different morph. And my case here is Iraq, and also I'll talk about Iraqi Kurdistan because it's a few steps ahead of the rest of the country because it has stability. So if you want to know what's going to happen once Iraq is stable, then the example would be Kurdistan, and that foreshadows maybe the transition in the rest of the country. I want to also reiterate the point of the difference between civil societies and NGOs, NGOs being a component of the civil society and the latter being larger concept of movements outside the government, organizations of people, regardless of whether they're networked, whether they're hierarchical, whether they're natural or formed in the society. But at times I'll probably be using them interchangeably, and I'll try to make the distinctions as much as I can. The role of civil society in a country undergoing transition like Iraq is the role of playing another power alternative to the state power, and to be able to be a check of accountability on the government. In Iraq, this is a new phenomenon because under the Baath regime, as the first panel pointed out, any form of organization outside the state was banned. Now the challenge is, right now that monopoly has been broken to smaller monopolies, what role is there for the civil society and these new organizations that have mushroomed after 2003? So I'll be talking about two themes, and maybe to get your morale down about any hopes you have for civil society, but then give you a couple of positive examples just to close on a positive end. I'll be talking about dependency, and then as part of that, I'll be talking about funding. In terms of dependency, Iraq is a country where dependency defines its international dimension as well as its domestic dimension. Internationally, its security is dependent on the existence and presence of foreign forces. A lot of its politics is dependent on regional politics, on neighbors, on foreign influences. The politics inside the political parties often are seen as stooges of powers and interests outside the Iraqi borders. In the same way, this mechanism applies internally to the civil society. A lot of times, non-governmental organizations have political affiliations. And when I was working for one of the USAID programs and we had to train NGOs, we had to be very mindful who we invite to our sessions. So we had to maintain a political balance. When we invited the NGOs, we had to make sure that every political actor, we know that every political actor and party had an NGOs or a group of NGOs affiliated to them. So we had to be mindful of maintaining that balance, because at the end of the day, we represented an American arm of interests, of diplomacy, of development work, and we wanted to be politically correct. That wasn't very effective. Now, in terms of Iraq, and when we come to talk about funding, the very presence of these NGOs mushroomed after 2003 mostly as a market response to the availability of funds, rather than pursuing issues and seeking funding and opportunities because there is something that you want to pursue. I'm not saying that they did not exist, but that was the trend. Having put my hand in the mud, working for numerous USAID contractors. And this creates the dependency on the availability of funding. Now, the first panel discussed how when the funding evaporates, when the interest vanishes, or when there is a more pressing conflict and then the focus shifts from one country to the other, these NGOs go home. That does not seem to be the case in Iraq, because if Iraq has problems, and many problems, one that is not a problem is the availability of funding, because Iraq has oil. It has oil money. And that oil money is concentrated in the hands of few political parties who have been, call it lucky, or call it strategically positioning themselves to be able to put their hands on it. And the challenge of transition in Iraq in general, and this is the general point I'm making, is the actors that can manage to stay now are probably going to be there for the long haul. Therefore, what some scholars have called the resource curse, in which countries that depend on a single natural resource for their income tend to have dysfunctional institutions, both political and economic, creates a upside down pyramid or structure of influence in which rather than the people, which is the essence of democracy, rather than the government being beholden to the people are actually beholden to the government. In just to give you some numbers, some 90% of the workforce in the Kurdistan region work for the government. I mean, more than 70% of the budget is simply distributed as salaries. It's so big. It's basically a social system without the benefits of the independence, rather creating more dependencies. So when we apply this on the CSOs and how they're going to react to this, we're starting to see, with the withdrawal of international funding, the government and the political parties have been very happy to step in. And this is a dimension of Iraqi politics. Iraqi influence and politics, when you switch on an Iraqi channel on any sect or any ethnic group, a lot of times you hear about some hints of ideological and ethnic differences, but a lot of times it's about interest, it's about patronage, it's about who is better at the game of controlling others. Some of it is smaller to the Russian compromise. A lot of it is who pays your salary and who do you have to be concerned not to cross, so your salary wouldn't be cut. And even if it does, which is also creates some new skill sets, then if X cuts my salary, who is the Y that I can run into? So according to a National Democratic Institute poll, in the region of Kurdistan, more than 40% of NGOs in the circle of NDI get funding from the government. For now, it's only 8% in the rest of the country. But again, the trend is not going in the direction of Baghdad, it's going in the direction of Kurdistan. So with time, I'm expecting to see more and more NGOs in the rest of the country getting funding from the government. And talking about government intrusion, in the previous cabinet of the Kurdistan Regional Government, there was a Ministry of Civil Society Affairs. Sounds funny. Well, they got rid of it. But still, there are more than one mechanism for the petrodollar in the hands of the government to be transferred to the hands of these NGOs. So right now, the dependency remains, regardless of the funding source, which is detrimental to the influence of the civil society organizations as a check on the government, as facilitators of dialogue across different groups. However, despite this cynical introduction, there are elements of hope. Well, one, within the NGO community, in particular, and generally with the civil society, which in Iraq includes the professional syndicates, some of the student organizations, the women's organizations, that have traditionally been aligned with political parties, they're starting to see value in independence. Some of them basically got to the habit of being a CSO, of being an NGO. It's sort of, when you do something for a long time, you get into the habit of doing it. Some of them have traveled to the other countries. They've seen that, well, actually we could do a lot more than being the agents of a political party. So this sort of getting used to is a factor. Another one is that politics in Iraq and politicians in Iraq, probably elsewhere as well, are increasingly being accused of corruption. So people who have a project, have ideas, have concern for issues, and they want to promote it, they're sincere about it, and there are a lot of them, are trying to find an alternative way outside the political system of promoting those affairs, those issues, those concerns. And the CSO and the NGO community is increasingly becoming one such venue. They don't want to be associated with the corruption of the government and the politics, so they try to say that we're not affiliated, and that creates incentive for more independence. To have a comment about USAID and how the USAID works and the funding that they provide, which also has contributed to this negative dynamic, and that is the issue of how USAID is obsessed with measurables. How many people did you invite to your training? We trained so many NGOs and CSOs, and the measure was how many people came in, that we also created an impression for these NGOs that, well, our job is to train you, and then your job is go to train people. Therefore, NGOs, when you ask them, what do you do? They say, we train. They don't advocate. They don't see that advocacy is sort of their main concern, their main job. Part of it has had positive effects, obviously, when it comes to education, but that's not the main role of civil society organizations, to do what we were doing to them, put them in a hall like this and talk at them. Another thing is the over-bureaucratization of again, that comes in the mentality of outsourcing it to an NGO, and then USAID's job is to monitor that NGO, and then to monitor it from a compound, all you have to look for are something that you can measure. So programs that have long-term, all right, one more minute. Programs that have long-term effect often get missed. Now, I promised to give you a couple of examples of hope. Now, one of them is social entrepreneurship, and my example of that is the school where I graduated from. It's a school that was sponsored by Hizmet or Gülen merchants from Turkey in 1994. It was a free high school, secondary and high school, but it established a reputation of itself because it graduated smart students. And after that, it started charging people for money. We're a good school. We can educate your kids. We can teach them English, Turkish, math, and science. And these students can go and participate in international scientific Olympics. And they come back with prizes, gold medals, bronze, and a lot of my friends got that. So they're good. They become marketable. And once they became marketable, now my sister has to pay a lot of money to be in that school. But that money is then invested in building another school in another town. So this process of mushrooming without being dependent on anyone, just being self-sustainable, has created a system in which you have an education system in place that goes from elementary and kindergarten all the way to a university now. And this also had some of the positive effects that any CSO, and I consider universities and education systems to be CSOs to have, which Turkey and Kurdistan have always had problems regarding the PKK and the Kurdish nationalism issue. But they actually invited about 100 members of the Turkish parliament to come and inaugurate the university in Kurdistan. That was groundbreaking. So that is one way to create this dependency on political actors and the government, social entrepreneurship. The other one is the media, which bites very hard. And the reason that, and of course, media was trained mainly by USAID and the American organizations, but the reason it's more successful than the NGOs is because rather than teaching them something which is, I don't want to be tainted, but colored by Western values and norms like gender equality, some of the terms that spur a lot of debate within the Iraqi very conservative community, they have trained them skills. How to investigate, how to write, how to advertise, skills that are easily applicable. And therefore, the media has been more active as a check on the government than many of the NGO communities. Finally, an emerging trend are national NGOs rather than regional or local, but national networks of NGOs in which people in this city find people in the south, people in the center, that we have a similar concern and we can cooperate on this, and I think that's a very positive emerging trend. Thank you very much.